just relaxed and paid attention.
Whoops, got carried away here. Hello, welcome back to 21st Century Radio. I'm Dr. Bob Hieronimus, what's left of me anyway, and our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner. Our engineer is Anita Brockington. There they go. Yes, indeed. Of course, our guest tonight is Peter Robbins, and we are finishing up a certain part of UFOs and Bud Hopkins, but we're also moving into, there it is, right there. We are moving into conspiracy theories. Yes, indeed. Look at what's happened over the decades. I mean, we used to ridicule these kind of situations, conspiracy theories. Now, our president loves them. Well, he's the ex-president, but he still loves them. So let's talk about Bud Hopkins. We're also moving into this nefarious thing called QAnon.
Yeah, just to complete the thought from before the break, Bob, in 1982, the Queen's Museum sponsored a show called The UFO Show, which Bud curated and attracted work from numerous artists, from very famous ones like Keith Haring to not quite as famous ones like yours truly. And a number of those works will be included in this show. Taras became interested in the whole abduction phenomena when he was quite young because it had happened to somebody who was very close to him, who he took very seriously and is incredibly knowledgeable in the literature and has committed himself to producing this major retrospective and this absolutely radical exhibit for a major academic institution. I could not be prouder of him. And these things take time to put together. So it will be opening in September of 2023. And well before that, I hope I'll be invited back to talk about developments and that you'll have Taras as a guest on your show.
Well, if you pay me $500, we'll put you on again.
That's all?
That's all. That's all you got to do. Just check tomorrow and we'll put
What a deal.
Yeah, that's right. That's how things are done in America these days. That's at the University of Maryland.
I'll pay you the exact same fee that, well, I always pay you to be on the show.
Yeah, well, that's... Okay, now I'd like to talk about this new era of conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
Can we move into this terrible area? Because I know you've read some of my books anyway, the Founding Fathers, Secret Societies, and those kind of things, which really point out the shallowness of many of these theories. But it's easy to convince children, and some of my children in my family fell for this kind of stuff, and I was unhappy about it. But let's talk about these called QAnon. I've paid little attention to them. And its connection to the UFO.
I paid little attention to them at the start, but then you've got to pay attention to them. We've become mainstream, don't you?
Yep. You should. Well, the question is, the UFO community has always been very susceptible to conspiracy theories in general. So how are they, in general, leaning towards this new crop of theories regarding deep state pedophiles and Satan worshipers versus ex-President Trump, who was supposed to blow it all wide open? As a matter of fact, he's kind of part of that with all these women and all this stuff. So I don't understand that.
It is outrageous, it's infuriating, and it's very sad. I think that the so-called UFO research community is somewhat reflective of the public at large. I don't think anybody has ever taken a survey. There's no demographics that I'm aware of, but I'd be willing to bet that a good portion of it votes Republican, a good portion of it votes Democratic. Let's say roughly half identify as conservatives and half as progressives. But you're right in that a subject as ungovernable, as untraditional, and perceived by society at large until more or less recently, I think is fair to say, especially based on what we've discussed the first hour of the show. Um, the whole idea for many people that we're being visited by other intelligences or that they're here in another dimension or what have you is been very far-fetched from the start. Plus, folks who want to put forward an absolutely absurd notion you can't disprove it because there's a total lack of evidence any more than they can absolutely prove it. I think many of my colleagues have been very wise to not be political in putting forward their work, in the talks that they do, the books that they write, the posts that they make. I can respect that on a very real level. Unfortunately, I am, like you, very much a creature who came of age in the 60s. I operate by certain principles, and sometimes I don't know to shut my mouth when it might serve me. I am certainly a partisan person and have put forward my own views repeatedly, and I think lost folks in the process occasionally, and that's a shame. But 10 years ago, the whole idea of what we would have called then wild conspiracy theories was identified as a fringe group. Granted, anti-intellectualism and the idea that my opinion is worth your university degree. What I think may be the case is worth all of your years of specific training in a given discipline is not a good thing, but it is now a major populist point of view. The whole idea that our current president was going to bring people into government who had not been sullied by government and would be new blood and approach things in a new way has not really worked out very well when you look at the rate of attrition and the folks who were the very best people who turned out not to be the very best people.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody in the work personally who has made a vocal defense of, for example, this whole QAnon outrageous series of claims, which would be laughable if so many people weren't taking them seriously. And now we have a few new members of Congress who take it seriously. So where it's going, I don't know. But empirical fact, being able to establish something rather than just make a claim and gather a bunch of believers, I think it's really dangerous to democracy. And I hope that in the climate that will be set in the new administration, maybe we'll be addressing it in a more grounded and rational way. It's not going to go away. And especially the outrageous claims of a group like QAnon, which I find, again, laughable if they weren't so horrible and being taken so seriously by so many people.
It is indeed very sad because it unfortunately affects especially the younger people.
Oh, yeah.
And that is going to be very serious problem in the decades to come.
Well, the stats around people who otherwise seem decent enough and who are family people and work hard and pay their taxes and, hope that they have health care and, want their kids to get a good education, who don't believe the Holocaust happened.
I know. Yes. Jeez.
How could it have happened? It's just too
Yeah.
crazy. It's too wild. 6 million Jewish people and several million other people just exterminated. Well, for anybody that delves just below the surface, the irony is that the Germans were the best record keepers in history. That extraordinary document of 20-odd hours that PBS has aired of Shoah, the records speak for themselves. And although the last of these poor souls who were caught up in the camps are now starting to go in their 80s and 90s, even if they were kids, it's as real as anything in history has been. And yet you could say it's a conspiracy theory, that there are people who simply deny its reality. Um, the idea that there is this elite, and they all happen to be members of the Democratic Party, which I find fascinating that no Republicans are involved in this, just my own observation, that um, kidnap children, extract certain glands from them, which they ingest or have injected into them to extend their lives, who are part of the whole serving the 1% cabal of the Bilderbergers and the Rothschilds and, all of these international power brokers. Um, if it's real, show us something credible that I don't even know how to address it fully, because nothing in life prepared me for having to uh, defend rationality to the degree that it's been taken out of rationality. And I'm pretty good at it, because in UFO research, you're always dealing with skeptics and debunkers and people whose mantra is it can't be, therefore it isn't, therefore it's something else. But this is a very dangerous trend. And yes, as you pointed out, and as we all know, it has been generated not from the bottom up, but from the top down over the
Yes.
last years. And the fact that the most powerful person in the American government, and arguably in the world, is a huge adherent of this and routinely says things that simply aren't true. Um, this election was probably as well monitored as any election in American history. The recounts and the re-recounts have confirmed the original findings that the man's a liar. And there are people that believe everything he says. And I find that really sad. And one thing I will never forgive Donald Trump for is I have a lot of friends, and usually have since I was young, who have different political opinions that I do. And I have always refused to have that destroy a friendship. But it's vaporized quite a number of them over the past 4 years. Other ones, we do our best to struggle. And my hope is that over the next few years, as the smoke clears a bit, maybe it's different for me because I grew up as a New Yorker and I've watched this guy as a con man and as a huckster and as a showman and a
part
man
of the mafia
for 40 odd years. Maybe they will have a different appreciation for him as we move forward, because if we can't get ourselves all even relatively on the same grid, and realize that we're not each other's enemies, as opposed to what we've always been in America, an amalgam of people that try to find center points and compromise, which I think starting under George Bush and the evil Dick Cheney became this macho game of winner take all, my way or the highway, compromises for sissies.
That's right.
This is not the American way,
No,
and we need to readdress it.
I agree, and I think that our country is going to go through a rebirth, in my opinion, in the years to come. It's going to take years. It's not going to happen.
Yes, I agree.
And the thing that finally will come to an understanding is that you cannot. What the problem with our civilization in America is today, people do not read. They listen.
Yes.
They listen to radio. They watch television. They watch a lot of Fox television, and that's where they get their ideas. That's where they develop. They do not in any way read, because I've talked to a lot of them about it. Even some of my friends, closest friends, unfortunately, they don't read. They don't bother. So how are they helping America if they want to stay dumb? I don't know, but I thought people that love this country would do things for this country without thinking that they had to be paid to do it and that kind of thing. But
you have brought up the most important point, I think, which is it has to do with reading. and that it has become an anathema to most people. We are in an age, I joked with you, that we're analog guys in a digital world, but we grew up loving reading and loving books. We're
Yes.
both published orders. We love the English language. We love learning new stuff. We love having our opinions challenged. And when time allows, I'm a movie lover and I have been since I was a kid. I love sitting down in front of a great film, or now we are in arguably the second golden age of television, the first one being in the 50s in a sense, where there's so much quality productions being done, but that's not a substitute for reading. And I don't have time for it. I'm not into books. This is not an excuse. And I guess it's a habit that's developed, and maybe it's put in place by, observing our parents and what they do. My parents were readers, and I got the habit young and worked in libraries several times. It's tragic and it's scary, the same way that cursive writing has disappeared off the map. It's not taught in schools anymore.
Well, I think it's time to move on to our dear friend James Forrestal after the break. My boss tells me. And so, all right. So we're listening to and talking with my dear friend Peter Robbins, and we're leaving UFOs at this particular point. And actually, when we get into James Forrestal, there is UFO relationship there as well. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
This is Travis Walton, the author of Fire in the Sky and the subject of the movie by the same name. And you're listening to 21st Century Radio, hosted by Dr. Bob Hieronimus.
Good old Travis Walton. Boy, remember him?
A dear friend.
Yes. Yes, a dear
Like all
friend.
of the people who you're putting in the cutaways there.
Yeah, well.
Thank you.
Well, it serves you right. And me too as well. Now we get to a very important thing. We have people in California right now waiting to hear this one. Who was James Forrestal? And please feel free to take up as much time as you need to get this very important answer from you.
I'm honored to, Bob. I first became aware of James Forrestal in 1987 and became obsessed with his life story and the circumstances surrounding his death. I had other projects, but I kept coming back to the Forrestal story. I spent time in the New York Times newspaper morgue and ultimately put together a project, which is why we're talking about this. James Forrestal was a Horatio Alger-like character, for me, larger than life. He rose from obscurity in a small town in upstate New York, went to Princeton, became a successful stockbroker, the head of an important firm, became an advisor to President Roosevelt, went on to become the assistant secretary, then the secretary of Navy. Then, after the war, President Truman asked him, not a team of people, but he asked James Forrestal to dismantle the old War Department, something that had been in place since the American Revolution, and replace it with a new defense entity called the Department of Defense, which James Forrestal did. He did it so well that Truman nominated him to become the first Secretary of Defense. Congress approved that nomination without exception. Every single senator and every single congressman approved that nomination, something unthinkable in this day and age.
That's for sure.
He retired. He stepped down he was sworn in September of 1947, and he stepped down in March of 1949. On the day that he stepped down, disturbances, things that had been building up inside of him, fully came to the fore, and he suffered a very public, major nervous breakdown. He tried to take his life several times. Within days, he was institutionalized at the Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland, most appropriate because he was a former Secretary of Navy. He was there for 6 weeks. His room on the 16th floor was kept under 24-hour guard by Marines working in 3 8-hour shifts every single 24-hour period. I know, from having accessed the hospital records, reading the accounts of everybody who knew him, who wrote a memoir, all of which I've read, from the accounts of his brother, from the people that loved him, that he was not only responding to treatment, but that the hospital administration had set a date for his release from the hospital. That was going to be on Sunday, May 22nd, 1949. His brother had arranged to be there that morning to pick him up and to take him to the estate of a friend to complete his recovery in privacy, after which, who knows what he would have done. However, if we're to believe the official account, early on the morning of May 22nd, an attendant who had never worked with him before. The reason was because the Marine who had had that night shift and who had become incredibly close to Forrestal, many of those closest to him felt it was almost a father-son relationship, did not show up that night. We were told officially that maybe alcohol was involved, but if you study the history of that Marine, you have to discount it. He took his responsibilities incredibly seriously and would have, especially on a significant evening like this. But a hospital attendant, who I don't think was a villain here, just a lackey, a setup, a pawn, so to say, checked on Mr. Forrestal at about 1:30 in the morning. Forrestal, who was absolutely charismatic. He was the kind of person who, when he walked into a room, all the attention turned to him, and it wasn't because he was loud or a big talker. He was Kennedy-esque in that sense, and among his circle of friends numbered playwrights and writers and actors and intellectuals. At that time, 1:30 in the morning, a few hours before his supposed discharge, he was copying a Sophocles poem out of a poetry anthology onto hospital stationery for his own purposes. And the attendant asked him if he was okay, if he wanted a sedative. No, thank you. Again, if we're to believe the official account, the attendant then left, forgetting to lock the door. And even though all of the hospital records and his psychiatrist, the chief psychiatrist at Bethesda there, they were all really clear that he'd responded very well to treatment, that he was looking forward to being discharged, but were led to supposedly believe that he had a relapse within that few-minute period, became extremely suicidal, walked out of his room, went to the room across the hallway, which was an unsecured small kitchen without bars on the window, and taking the sash off of his bathrobe, tying one end around his own neck very tight. And the Navy at first theorized that he had tied the other end to the radiator under the window, which was later disproven. Then, again, it's disproven, but hypothetically lowered himself out of the window to hang himself out of a 16th-story window, changed his mind, and we know this from absolute confirmed facts because of the fingernail scratch marks on the outer jamb of the window, lost his grip, and fell to his death. Well, I made it my business over the years. I'm a self-trained investigator, but it's what I do. And to a good degree, I do it well. to look at his life, because what first drew my attention to James Forrestal was the fact that overall he's been completely forgotten in American history. I would say an exception to that is a good number of people in your audience who make it their business to seek out this kind of information. And at the same time, almost no American, well educated or not, knows who he is. Maybe the name is familiar because there was an aircraft carrier named after him.
Yeah.
If you work in the intelligence community, there is a Forrestal Medal for achievements within intelligence. If you've ever been a tourist and visited the Pentagon, there's a big bust of James Vincent Forrestal when you walk into the main lobby. If you're a student at or you live in Princeton, New Jersey, you know that there is a campus on Princeton named after him, and there's also a shopping center named after him. Otherwise, he has disappeared. And as I studied his life and read the available material on him, and there's a wonderful biography as well as kind of a psychiatric evaluation of his life, a book that was a bestseller in 1951 or so, which is excerpts from his famous diary. You have a sense of an extraordinarily decent man, a patriot, a team player, so to say. Yeah, he's a rich, dead white guy on one level, so some people will simply dismiss him as irrelevant. But he loved his country as much as anybody I ever came across in my American history studies, and that is an amateur passion of mine. I then focused in on all of the circumstances surrounding his death. Now, in ufology, in the study of UFOs in modern times, Forrestal is an interesting footnote. He was sworn in as the first Secretary of Defense, a scant maybe 2.5 months after the crash at Roswell. When you watch this, I'll call it a documentary, although I don't know if there's a word for this. It's a dramatic reading, so to say. It's me and a green screen, an hour-long script that I spent a long time writing, 150 images or so, some film clips, a soundtrack. But to call it a documentary and compare it to what we normally think of is unfair to them. I'm very proud of it nonetheless. There is so much legend and myth about him. One thing that we do know is based on the job description of the Secretary of Defense, everything that Harry Truman knew about this phenomena was waiting for James Forrestal on his desk his first day at work. In putting all of this information together, and I stress very on and off, but this is a 30-year-long project for me, that we have confirming evidence from people who knew him, respected him, and cared about him, to people that knew him and despised him, that his mental, not even instability, but the weight on his shoulders increased markedly, starting with his tenure at the Department of Defense. Something weighed on him increasingly heavily, starting on that first day. And as I began to put together the published accounts of his death, the investigations into his death, then once the Navy's report, the official report on his death was released, not surprisingly, not only not giving us a lot of information that would be of value in putting the story together, but of being incredibly evasive on what they did acknowledge, which were very basic things. Mr. Forrestal certainly knew about the UFO reality from the get-go, but he was the one who was charged with getting down to the bottom of it. not the president. And the weight on him, again, was considerable. So I focused in on every circumstance surrounding his death. And what I first came to feel, then I feel was able to prove. And I use that word very specifically. I've had a number of attorneys pay me the compliment after hearing presentations that I've done on him of saying, yes, it's all circumstantial evidence, but you could have gotten a grand jury to convene a trial because I think this man was murdered too. And the latter part of the documentary is about why. And I'm not going to give my final conclusions on it here because I would like people to watch the thing at some point or another. But James Vincent Forrestal is a man who should be restored honorably to his place in American history. And ironically, now that the whole ridicule factor around UFOs seems to be lifting, and certain things are coming out that would have been too embarrassing to the Truman government. Everyone who there is gone, and whatever living relatives they have, I would think could live with the conclusions that I put forward. In working on this project, Bob, I made a decision early on. There's so much wonderfully colorful, I'll call them unconfirmed sources that allege that he was in Roswell not long after the crash, that he saw the wreckage for himself, and as our friend Paul Davids, who produced a marvelous film some years ago, really in a class by itself called Roswell.
Oh, that was good.
And I say in a class by itself because we've had so many movies dealing with the UFO phenomena, some of them spectacularly enjoyable, interesting, educational, and so many of them, just such silly nonsense and everything in between. Paul's movie is so engaging in great part because it's not, some bells and whistles, lots of special effects, good aliens, bad aliens. It's about the impact on the life of one man of having had the courage to say certain things about the subject very early on and then have to retract them. And we're talking about Jesse Marcel Sr. here. Jesse Marcel Jr., who passed about half a dozen years ago, an extraordinarily decent guy in his own right, and following very much in his father's footsteps. Jesse Marcel Sr. was an Army Air Corps pilot, shot down, POW in Germany for the latter part of the war, who was the base intelligence officer at the old Roswell Army Airfield. And he was one of the first two military personnel out to the debris field. And he was photographed with debris and quoted as saying that it was not anything other than something he had never seen before. And the materials themselves were spectacularly unlike anything that we had encountered. This has now entered the realm of popular culture, and many of your listeners who are not necessarily serious students of the UFO subject are aware of this. The reason I bring up Paul's movie is because there is a scene in the film, and Paul had every right to present that scene. It's great drama, and it may have happened. We see an actor playing Forrestal behind a plate glass window looking into a room where there is the captured alien. And in making eye contact with it, the actor's face suggests to us that something is happening to him that is out of his control and very unnerving. And so informed speculation can suggest that maybe, he was under the influence, or that somehow this contributed to his death. I think it's certainly the knowledge that this was real, whether or not that scene ever happened in real life, was enough to help put him under, in great part because although, again, a charismatic guy, a well-respected and liked guy, he lacked that thing in his characterological makeup to fully be open with anyone, including his wife in a very bad marriage and including his best friends. And what we have is a Greek-level tragedy of a man who would die. I think he really would have taken a bullet for either Roosevelt or Truman. He was that dedicated a member of both of their administrations. He loved work in government more than he loved work making money, no question about it, on Wall Street. When duty called him to Washington to become a member of the informal so-called kitchen cabinet, or the dollar-a-year men, that Roosevelt pulled together among successful American businessmen and industrialists, Forrestal was the one who never left Washington. The other ones went back to their careers and continued to become more and more wealthy Americans. I got very emotionally involved in this project because he, in trying to take his own life, after all the pieces are put together, for me, there was no question that he understood that there were people around Truman who felt that he could no longer be trusted.
Yeah, that must
even if he recovered.
That must have crushed him. It had to have crushed him. And how Truman left it also. Well, we'll take our final break here, finish this up, and then move on to something else, especially dealing. But okay, we'll be back in 24 hours. In just a few minutes, of course.
Hello, this is Alejandro Rojas, UFO Mindset, listening to 24 with Dr. Bob. To 24 with
Oh, welcome back, 21st Century Radio, with our guest, Peter Robbins. Peter, we have less than 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
Could you tell us how our listeners can get a copy of this disc, and then we can continue on?
I sure can. I'll just complete one thought before that. Knowing that there's so much legend, myth, lore around Mr. Forrestal, I decided in doing this that I would only work from established sources, published books, papers, articles, documents, nothing that I couldn't prove, nothing that was unverifiable. It makes it a little drier, maybe a little less sexy or exotic for some, but I'm very proud of it. The reason it's not streaming somewhere right now has to do with the fact that I'm me and not a professional filmmaker. After it was done, it was called to my attention by one of my dear executive producers that I had not followed up on the ownership, or whether or not it was in the public domain, of the many, many, many images I drew from. So I am now in the final process of chasing down every image that I used, finding out if I need to pay a fee for it or it's in the public domain. It will be streaming, hopefully, in the next few months. In the meantime, the DVD is available. I'm willing to live with the risk of getting them out there. You are kind enough to post the link to the address it needs to be sent to. It's $15, and that includes shipping. And it also, for hearing impaired people, it has word-for-word closed captions.
Oh, great. That's great.
And if you speak Spanish and not English, or both languages, it is also wonderfully translated into Spanish. I'm very proud of both of those details.
I wish I would have learned Spanish. When we were all growing up in the old days, they said when we had to choose between French and Spanish, and they kept telling us that, hey, French is going to be the language in the future. So study French.
I
So
followed that same trajectory. And of course, in all the French districts of New York City where I grew up, it's been very valuable to me. Spanish, of course, is quite obscure.
yes, I know. And I really kicked myself. And I took 7 years of French, and there's no way in the world we're going to be using that. But
France.
I have to blame that on my favorite high school, City College, Baltimore City College. They put the pressure on me. Hey, you should definitely do French, Bob. You don't want to do that Spanish. I don't know why they said that. Okay. Now, hey, by the way, in the news this weekend is the discovery of a mysterious monolith. You want to talk about that?
Yes. In the remote Arizona desert, first, it immediately attracted the term monolith, which by definition is a large single-cut piece of stone. So it is not a monolith. It is a very well-fabricated, long stainless steel rectangle. And it's fascinating in a Mr. Spock kind of completely objective way how people will immediately go to the most exotic and extreme possibilities before looking at the most mundane everyday possibilities. And overnight, it became the new 2001 obelisk. And there has been a big buzz on the internet, especially in UFO-related circles. For me, as a pragmatist and somebody like you with an art background, I thought that seems to be a piece of minimal sculpture. What's it doing out there? Well, the same thing that a Robert Smithson earthwork was doing in remote Nevada and photographed from the air and getting an NEA grant. Somebody has placed that there, knowing sooner or later it would be found and that it would generate a lot of media attention. I think it's a sculpture by the late, great modern sculptor, John McCracken. And no sooner had it been discovered, I think yesterday it was, that it disappeared.
What?
So I deduce that it was not other intelligences from planet Xenu or other dimensions. It was either...
shoot.
I know, I'm raining on your parade. I know.
Gosh.
But
I was going to make $1 million out of this one.
I may be wrong, so
I'll
don't
give it
lose
to the
hope.
president. I'll give it to
But
the
it
president.
may have been taken away by the people who put it there and will now go up for sale or at a nice art auction, or some enterprising soul got in there with a pickup truck and a couple of friends, and they now have this object. But rest easy, America. I don't think it is extraterrestrial or interdimensional or anything in nature other than an earth-fabricated piece of steel done in a spirit of art and placed there in a spirit of mischief. My opinion only.
Well, I'd share that opinion, kind of. We got a little bit of time here. You are about to embark on a major new direction in your career.
I am, Bob.
So what can you tell us about?
I'm delighted to say that with the people that I'm working with this on, I have not been cleared to talk about it yet.
Oh, they're going to put you under arrest.
In about 2 weeks. And it will be something that may well keep me busy for the rest of my cognizant life. I wish that I could talk about it now, except to say I'm very excited about it. It's something I think, in a way, without even realizing it, I've been heading toward for many years in terms of moving forward and trying to reach a larger audience with the work that I do. And I hope that I'll be able to return here for my 35th time in the not too distant future, or maybe just come on briefly to discuss it or send you the relevant information for you to share with your audience. I am disappointed I can't break the story here, but that's the way it is, as Walter Cronkite used to close his shows.
Yeah, I really miss him. I really do. Well, I am so excited for you because I know you, because of the quality of what you do all the time. You don't have to be told over and over again. You've got to document, and get it right the first time before you go out and try to sell it for somebody. that's what I think so many people who get into some of this work, especially in broadcasting, do. They forget that more or less they are fortunate to have certain information, and they should be able to give it to others for free rather than to have to fight over it all the time.
Yeah, you've said it very well, and this is something I've been percolating away on for almost a year. And in a way, I'm glad it's taken as long as it has, because I really needed to grow into making the transition I'm going to make in terms of this slight career shift. And I've gotten really good training on it in my practical life as an investigative writer and UFO investigator and researcher. And I thank you for your good wishes on this, and look forward to being able to discuss it, and also involving you once it is up and coming.
Well,
up and going.
So you want to order that DVD, though. That's important. You want to repeat that information?
Yes, if you go to the appropriate place on 21st Century Radio website, you will see a link to the production company that has got it out there, On Wings, ONWINGES.com, and it will take you to the Forrestal ordering page and place that order. If you would like it signed or inscribed, I'll be honored and pleased to do that.
And good night. Thank you very much. Oh, geez.